Good morning. Welcome to Biology 1A. My name is Mike Meehan. I'm the academic coordinator for Biology 1A. I will deal with a lot of the administrative issues, grades, exams, things like that. My contact information is on the syllabus. I'll also be the lecturer for Biology 1A. There are no labs and no discussions this week. I'm going to say it one more time. There are no labs, no discussion this week. All labs, all discussions begin next week. You don't need to come to lab this week to check into lockers. No lab, no discussion this week. All right, very clear? Now, a lot of you are trying to switch lab sections or discussion sections, etc. We've put all that information on BSpace about how to do that. We'll try to process everything this weekend, so the deadline's pretty much on Friday. Submit any forms you want to try to switch discussion or lab times, and we'll see what we can do. We'll work on it over the weekend, and we'll inform you by Monday whether or not we were able to make the section changes. Now, we can't guarantee section changes. The problem is everything is full. So basically, if you want section, let's say 12 for lab, I have to have a student come out of section 12, and they have to move into maybe the section that you're coming out of. So it's not real easy to do, but we will process that. Deadline's pretty much Friday. We'll process everything over the weekend so that next week when you go to lab and go to discussion, you must go to the assigned section that you're in. Okay? Any questions about that? No questions? Excellent. So let's just discuss the syllabus. I sent it to you already via BSpace, so you definitely should read this carefully. I'm going to go over the exam dates with you right now. This is for the Biology 1A class. The first exam is Friday, February 18th. That's in the morning, 8 to 9 a.m. It will be in various rooms throughout the campus. You'll get an exam handout as we get closer to that. The second exam is also on a Friday, and that is April 1st. It's not April 1st Fool's joke. The exam's actually on April 1st, that Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. And then the final is May 9th, 8 to 11 a.m. Okay? So again, the exams for Bio 1A are 8 to 9 a.m. or 8 to 11 a.m. It's in the morning. Now, the first lab exam for Biology 1A lab is going to be on a Wednesday night. I think it's March 16th. 6:30 to 8:30, that's at night. Please make sure for the Bio 1A exams you come in the morning. For the Bio 1A lab exam, it's going to be Wednesday night. We have had many students who don't come to the exam on that first Friday because they're thinking it's at night. Question?
For the Bio 1AL exam, do we have labs that week?
So the question is, do you have lab the week of the lab exam? No, because we normally have labs on Wednesday night, and the exam's going to be Wednesday night. So you will not have lab that week, and we'll talk more about that on Monday night, because the first lab lecture is next Monday, 5 to 6:30, here in Pimentel. Any questions? Words of advice, studying. I know you've heard that Bio 1A and 1AL are both very hard classes, and that's not a false rumor. It's true, okay? You're going to work very hard in both classes. We are here to help you, though, okay? There's going to be office hours. GSIs will have office hours. The faculty will have office hours. I'll have office hours. Everyone teaching this class is teaching it because they want to, okay? They're not assigned to it. They want to teach it. So we really are here to help you. But you have to take the initiative to come to us, okay? So like I said, we have office hours. There's email. If you email us 50 questions at midnight and the exam's 8 in the morning, don't expect responses probably, okay? So be prepared a little bit. Send us the email a day or two ahead of time. The key thing for this class, I think, is do not fall behind. Okay, so say that mentally out loud to yourself right now. Do not fall behind. All right, great. Now, really what happens is this class is unlike the high school biology classes. This class will, and the lab class will require you to not only know a lot of facts, because those facts serve the foundation, but you have to be able to apply those facts and synthesize the information. And that's a much higher integrative step than usually what you did in high school. So if you try to wait till the night before the exam and try to cram, the results usually are not very good. And it's very difficult if you do poorly in that first exam to try to make up that ground, okay? So I'm just warning you. I've done this for over 20 years. That's over 25,000 students, fall, spring, and summer. And the number one consistent thing I see amongst all those students who come talk to me, and usually it's they're not doing well, is they fell behind. They didn't realize it was going to require so much work. So don't fall behind. When you study, focus not only on memorization, but also on application, okay? Any questions about that? Okay, so again, we're here to help. We have office hours. We'll be posting those on BSpace. And again, welcome and good luck in the class.
Yes, there we go. Great. Well, thanks a lot, Mike, and good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Doudna. I'm a professor in molecular and cell biology, and this is my, I think, third or maybe fourth year teaching Bio 1A. There was a break in the middle there. And my own research is on nucleic acid structure and function. I've been very interested for my whole career in understanding how RNA molecules are used in biology and in cells to do all sorts of interesting things. So I'm really a molecular biologist, and my focus is on molecules, and that's what we'll be talking about in this section of Bio 1A. So I just want to amplify a couple of things that Mike mentioned. So if you look take a quick look at the syllabus, you'll see that in my section of the course, we're going to cover the first 10 chapters of the textbook. This is the book right here, Campbell Biology. And actually, we're really going to focus on starting with chapter 5. So if you take a look at the textbook, you'll see that the first 4 chapters are really very introductory material. They talk, and we'll talk a little bit about what I think are the highlights of that material today. So basically, they cover what is biology, and some of the basic chemistry that you need to know to be able to understand the material that we're going to talk about in this course. For some of you, or even for many of you, this material will be review. And so if it is, then that's fine, and you should just look through that material and make sure that you are familiar with it. For others of you, this material, some of it might be new to you. And if it is, or if you don't feel very comfortable with the chemistry that's presented in the text, please do make sure that you actually read more of the material than I'm focusing on in the lecture, because it will be critical for you to have that foundation to understand the material that's going to come later in the course. Now, students, every year they ask, what do I need to know out of the book? There's obviously a lot of material in the book, and we're not going to cover it all in gory detail during lecture. So what I try to do in lecture is to call your attention to the things that I think are really the most exciting and interesting and critical things for you to understand and to come away knowing from this course. Do I want you to not read anything else in the book? No, read whatever you want to read, but you should be sure to make sure that you really understand and focus on the material that we're covering in lecture. When I write an exam, I'm going to focus on the material that we have specifically discussed in the lectures and that is covered in somewhat more detail in the course. And each of my lectures will tell you exactly what you need to read in the book to be sure that you have the background that you need to know in terms of studying for the exam. And finally, oops, okay, let's see. Can we switch to the slides, please? So Mike mentioned BSpace. So what I'll plan to do is be posting each week before usually by the end of the weekend, I will post the lecture notes for the lectures to come that week. So if you want to read ahead, you're welcome to download those and look at them. But they will be there for you on BSpace the week ahead of the lectures. Okay, my office hours are going to be Mondays, 12 to 1 p.m., and Fridays, 1:15 to 2:15 p.m. This is also in the, it's listed in here, so if you don't need to necessarily write it down, it's also on BSpace if you forget. And I'm going to hold office hours in VLSB 2084. Okay, this is a little bit bigger room than my office. I tried to do it in my office in the past, and that was a little bit tough. So please come to my office hours if you have questions. You can also send me an email, but there's a lot of students in the class, obviously, so I can't guarantee that I'll be able to answer questions by email. And in general, I encourage you to, if you have questions, please come to my office hours. Okay, so today, as I mentioned, we're going to be focusing on the very beginning material in the textbook. And these are specifically the pages that you should have a look at and focus on as you're studying this material. But like I said, please be sure to look through the first 4 chapters of the text. And if any of that introductory material is not familiar to you, you do need to know it for the course, okay? And what I want to just cover today in class is to talk a little bit about the levels of biological organization. We're going to talk a little bit about the chemistry of life, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the properties of water that are essential for understanding the way that biological molecules and systems can function, because without water, none of us would be here. Okay, and one other thing I wanted to mention. So, of course, the class is quite large, and it makes it harder for us to have a personal connection. But if you are sitting in the audience and I say something that doesn't make sense, there's a good chance that a lot of your classmates feel the same way. So if there is a burning question that comes up when I'm giving the lecture, please do ask a question, because I think that's important for everyone's understanding. Okay, so as we think about biology, and especially as you start to look at the textbook, you'll see that an important underlying theme in all of what we're going to be discussing is evolution. And this is a theme in biology that really underscores everything that we think about, from whether we're thinking about molecules, whether we're thinking about organisms, or whether we're thinking about whole ecosystems, right? Everything is really interconnected. And we'll be touching on that theme quite a bit as we go through this material. And so biology is really the scientific study of life, trying to understand how it is that life exists, how it works, and how different kinds of levels of different systems in biology interact. And biologists who study various aspects of biology ask questions such as, how does a single cell develop into a whole organism? How does the human brain work? And how do living things interact in communities, right? And so there's many different kinds of biologists, and one can ask questions at many different levels. And for many of us, so when I was at the stage that you are all at, I realized that what I really found fascinating and most exciting was molecules. And I was very interested in how molecules that are found in biology are able to do all sorts of interesting things. How is it that molecules can ultimately confer the ability to replicate and to reproduce and to ultimately to think and to be who we are as humans? So I think that for me, it was that level of understanding that I wanted to be working at. But everybody's different, and we all have passions that we have that sort of dictate the level at which we want to understand something. And that's true in biology as well. And so as I mentioned, evolution is really the overarching theme in biology, and your book talks quite a bit about this and gives a little bit of the history of Charles Darwin and his original research. And the thing about evolution is that it really makes sense of everything that we know about living organisms. And what we find is that organisms that are alive are modified descendants of common ancestors. So that's a theme that runs through really all of biology. And I point out here that there's a really great, I don't know if anybody here may have seen this already, but it's not that new, but it's a really great three-part series that runs on Nova called Becoming Human. And you can actually download this for free from the Nova website. You can also buy it for not very much off of iTunes. And this is a great series if you're interested at all in sort of the evolutionary history of humans, because it really talks about the work that's gone into understanding human evolution, both at the level of anthropology and looking at bones and trying to make sense of skeletons, but also at the level of molecules. So one of the things that's really revolutionized the field of anthropology in recent years is genomic sequencing, DNA sequencing. So it's been possible to make a lot of inferences about the connections between different organisms and different human ancestors by looking at DNA sequencing data. And you may be familiar with the fact that fairly recently it was possible to sequence the genomic DNA of Neanderthal remains. And so it was possible to do some comparative analysis of the DNA sequences found in Neanderthals and compare them to modern humans. And so this kind of research at the molecular level is really very important for informing our thinking about human evolution, and this goes on in many other areas of biology as well. So that's just one example of this, the way that this theme runs through everything that we think about in biology. Now, your book also talks about the biological hierarchy, and this is really the idea that ultimately we start off at the sort of highest level thinking about the whole biosphere. So this is really the way that all living systems interact on the Earth and how we interact with our environment. And then within the biosphere, of course, we have various different kinds of ecosystems, and these can be divided into communities and various populations of organisms that live in these communities. And then we can continue to break it down into organs and systems that are made up of individual cells. Inside of the cells are organelles and molecules, of course, and these are what comprise the tissues that we find in living systems. And so in my section of this course, we're really going to be focusing on this area over here, figuring out looking at how cells are put together, how organelles are made up, and the molecules that we find in those kinds of compartments. And what you'll see is that in biology, a lot of it is about compartmentalization, right? So cells are really just a way of containing a set of molecules in a particular place, and within the cells, there are also compartments that are highly organized. And that allows the molecules that are inside of those cells not to just to be floating around inside of a bag, but they actually are positioned such that they can carry out very specific kinds of functions. And we'll be focusing on some of those kinds of processes. Okay, and so this is another theme that comes up in the textbook, which is the idea of emergent properties. So, when we try to do experiments as scientists, it's very difficult to do an experiment, especially if you're somebody like me who is studying molecules. It's very hard to do that if we are looking at an entire cell, because there's a lot of molecules in the cell, right? I mean, a lot, and many different kinds, and they're interacting, and they're changing, and they're dynamic, and they're moving around, they're getting made and destroyed all the time. And so if we really want to understand the very detailed chemical behavior of some of those molecules, it's often easier to work with molecules individually, or at least in small sets, so that we can try to define what's actually happening with, let's say, a particular protein enzyme and what kinds of activities it might have. And but of course, ultimately, the cell and the organism and the whole biosphere, really, right, is made up of the properties that come together that are produced when all of those molecules and cells are interacting. And so this is really the idea of emergent properties. So these are properties that result from the interaction of all of these individual components. And so as we go through the material that I'll be covering in this section, you'll see that we're often going to be talking about individual molecules, but I want you to keep in mind that it's really, in biology, we really have to be aware that each of those molecules individually is really interacting in a much larger framework in the context of a cell or a tissue or an organism, right? And so as scientists, we have to be very cautious and just always keep that in our minds. If we're working with an individual molecule that's been purified in the laboratory, we learn things about it, but it may behave differently in the context of a cell or an organism. Okay, and so, and this is sort of just characterized by the idea that we can sort of use this analogy of a functioning bicycle. So we can examine all the pieces and parts that make up a bicycle and learn a lot about how they work, but we probably won't really understand the whole bicycle unless we have it assembled into its functional form, right? So, and that's the same is true in biology. So there's sort of this tension between trying to understand the individual parts at a level at which we feel like we really know how they behave and how they work and the chemistry behind them, but we also have to be cognizant of the fact that they may work differently in the, once they're in the, inside of an assembled cell or organism. Okay, and then and I just want to point out that systems biology is kind of one of the, I would say, future directions of a lot of the kinds of biology that we're going to be talking about here, which is that there's a really major effort to try to take a lot of the information that we've been learning about individual molecules in biology and start to understand how it is that they really do all work together inside of a large network in the cell. And so this is an area of biology called systems biology, and it's the idea that we can come up with models that tell us about the dynamic behavior of entire biological systems. And how do we do that? Well, we start with understanding individual molecular behavior, but then we have to start asking, how is it that these molecules interact when they're together in a cell? And these are important for asking questions like, how do drugs affect something like blood pressure? How do we think about treating somebody that has a disease like cancer? If we give them a drug that's going to inhibit the growth of cancer, what is it going to do to the rest of the systems in their body, the tissues in their body, right? And so we have to start thinking more globally about how these molecular interactions are actually working. And this is a big challenge, and it really involves not only experimental science and working with individual samples, but we also have to use computational biology. And there's an increasing effort, and I think it's really exciting that there's been a big influx of people into biology who have a lot of interest in mathematics and computation, who are coming up with increasingly sophisticated models for the behavior of molecules inside of large networks. So can we understand what happens when, for example, a small molecule drug is introduced into someone's body? It gets localized to various places, it interacts with individual molecules in their body, but it also gets metabolized, it gets broken down in the liver by various enzymes, and those metabolites might have various activities, and eventually the drug gets excreted. And so it's a process that we can begin to model computationally, and then the hope is that those kinds of models will allow us to then, as experimentalists, go back and test ideas that come out of those models. So there's a kind of a back and forth. And I think increasingly in biology, certainly in the field of molecular biology, this is a very exciting time, because there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for taking molecular understanding and really trying to start to integrate it into the whole body, put the bicycle back together. Okay, and so chapter 2 of the textbook really talks about the chemical foundations for life. And why do we have to talk about chemistry in a biology class? Well, molecules are chemicals, right? And so they really, we find that living organisms, of course, are subject to the basic laws of both physics and chemistry. So if we want to be able to talk in any detail about these kinds of molecules and their behaviors in biological systems, we have to understand some of the basic chemistry. So like I said, please have a look at chapter 2. For a lot of you, this will be review, but for some of you, it might not be. So if some of that material looks new, please be sure that you study it. And I want to just point out a few key concepts here, and I think a lot of these ideas will be probably obvious to many of you. But first of all, matter consists of chemical elements both in pure form and in combinations called compounds, right? And so just as in any science, we have certain terms that we need to learn and be familiar with so that we can all converse at the same level about this material. So we need to understand what matter is. Organisms are composed of it. And basically, matter is anything that takes up space and has mass, all right? And so to understand matter, we have to understand a little bit about the elements and compounds. So matter is made up of elements, and an element is a substance that cannot be broken down to anything else, to any other substance, by chemical reactions. Okay, that's an element. And there they are, over there. And a compound is a substance that consists of two or more elements that come together in a fixed ratio so that we can write a chemical formula for a compound, right? So water, H2O, that's a very simple compound. But there are much more complex compounds that make up many of the larger biological molecules that are found in biology. And most importantly, a compound, it has characteristics that are very different from those of its component elements. All right, and so we can ask, is oxygen an element or a compound? It's O2, but it's an element, right? Yeah. Iron is also an element, but water and carbon dioxide are both compounds, right? Okay, and this is just a figure taken out of the book. So this shows a very simple example of two elements. So here's sodium, which is a metal, and chlorine, which is actually a poisonous gas, right? So these are both elements, but when they come together, they form an edible salt, sodium chloride. So we wouldn't want to have much to do with these elements, but salt we use every day, right? So that's just a very simple example of the difference between elements and compounds. Now, in life, so there are only about 25 of all of the elements are essential in life. The rest are not. And of those 25, there's only 4 elements that make up the vast majority of the molecules that are of biological importance. And those 4 are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, right? And they make up more than 95% of all living matter. And then what about the other 4%? Well, the other 4% are mostly calcium, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur, just 4 additional elements. So just 8 elements make up the vast majority of the molecules that are found in biology. And then there are, of course, a few trace elements that are, interestingly, they're also required by organisms, but they're required in very small quantities. And those would be things like selenium, for example, or zinc. Okay? Those are compounds that if we don't have selenium or zinc in our diet at all, we will not be healthy, right? We will have serious problems. But if we have too much of those trace metals in our diet, we will also not be very healthy, right? So it's important to have trace metals around available, but not in quantities that are too high. Does anybody know, so why do we need, what do you think some of those trace materials are actually doing? Does anybody know why we need them in trace amounts? Why would we need zinc? I heard catalyst. Yeah, so that's sort of right. So, there are certain enzymes that actually require metals like zinc in their active site. And so but they're only needed in a few enzymes in the body, for example. So that's why they're typically needed just in trace amounts. Was there I saw a hand up back there, maybe, no? Okay, and then this is this is just a table, and in the 9th, this is from the 8th edition of the book. In the 9th edition, the table is drawn a little differently. The material is all the same. Basically, again, showing you the percentage of human body weight that is comprised of these different elements. Interestingly, it's oxygen that is the most abundant, right? Followed by carbon. We might have thought it would be carbon, but And then we have these elements here that are present in much lower quantities, and then here are some of the trace elements down here. Okay, and then if we have deficiencies of some of the essential elements, both plants and animals will show effects. They'll show a phenotype for that deficiency, right? And these are just a couple of examples. So this is an experiment that was done where this is a cornfield, and these are 2 sets of corn plants that are growing, one of which is growing in soil that has an abundance of nitrogen available for the plants. And the plants on the right are growing in soil that is nitrogen deficient. And so what you can see is that the plants that are have a rich source of nitrogen are much taller. The leaves are much darker green. They just look like healthier plants, right? So these plants are growing, but they don't look nearly as healthy as the ones that have an abundant source of nitrogen. And then here's another example. So this is an example of a deficiency in humans. So humans need iodine, and again, this is one of the trace elements that you need, and it's actually required for the production of hormones that are made in the thymus, which is located in the neck. So if in diets and cultures where there is not enough iodine that's present in the diet, then what tends to happen is that the thymus enlarges because it's straining to make enough of the of thyroid hormone, and this causes the organ to actually enlarge. And so you can actually see that in this case right here, where her thymus gland has really enlarged due to this deficiency of iodine in the diet. And so you probably know that in our country, iodine is added to salt. So we have iodized salt, and that's a way that people are able to ensure that they get enough iodine to avoid this kind of deficiency. Okay, and then I want to talk now a little bit about water, because this is really the molecule that makes life possible. And so when you read in the newspaper that water has been found on Mars or somewhere else, or on the moon, for example, or there's evidence of water, the reason that people get so excited about this is because it's really thought to be unlikely that life, at least anything like the life that we know, would be able to evolve in the absence of water. And so why is that? Well, basically, on our planet, water is the biological solvent, right? It's the medium in which everything that is related to life has been able to evolve and continues to evolve. And in addition, we find that all living organisms require water more than any other substance, right? So we can go a long time without food, but we can't go very many days without water, right? Because it's really essential for all of the chemical reactions that are going on in our bodies. It's essential for our bodies to be able to extract nutrients, to metabolize nutrients, and to excrete waste products. And for all of those chemical reactions to occur efficiently, there really has to be sufficient water around and available. And we find that most cells are surrounded by water, and even within the cells, about 70 or more % of the cell itself is made up of water. And that's a really important thing to think about. So when we start talking about DNA molecules and RNA molecules and cell membranes and proteins and lipids, it's important to remember that these molecules are all surrounded by water. And so they have large shells of hydration. And that will affect their behavior. It will affect their ability to interact with each other and with other molecules. And it also means that that inside of the cell, the environment is what we call aqueous, right? It's an aqueous environment. It's not a hydrophobic environment. It's a hydrophilic environment in general, right? That means that molecules are constantly interacting with water in various ways. And so it's really important to understand a little bit about the structure of water and the chemistry of water, because it influences so much of what we're going to be talking about and thinking about in biology. And as I mentioned, the abundance of water is really the main reason that the Earth is habitable at all. If we didn't have water on this planet, it'd be very unlikely that we would find life, certainly not as we know it. And this is just a picture of the planet. Earth is called the blue planet for a reason, right? So from space, it's very clear that this planet has a lot of water on it. More than 70% of the surface is covered by water or ice. And so what can we say about a little bit about the chemistry of water that influences its behavior? And so it's important to understand that the water molecule is what's called a polar molecule. And that means that the opposite ends of the molecule have opposite charges. And that comes about because of the chemical structure of water. So you all know that water's chemical formula is H2O. So we have one oxygen atom and we have two hydrogen atoms that come together And when they interact, they actually don't interact in a symmetrical way. And because of that asymmetry in the way the molecule is structured, it sets up the polar behavior of the water molecule. And I'm going to show you that here in a moment. And it's this polarity that allows water molecules to interact by means of hydrogen bonding, okay, hydrogen bonding. And so I think this slide has, yeah. So this just shows what I was mentioning about the asymmetry of the structure of water, right? So water is a kind of a bent molecule, and it looks like this. And so what these partial charge symbols indicate is that at one end, or on one side of the water molecule where the hydrogens are, this tends to be positively charged in these regions. And on the other side where the oxygen atom is localizing, the charge tends to be negative, right? So it's a polarized molecule for that reason. We have negative charge over here, we have positive charge over here, and because of that, and so if you imagine water molecules in liquid water, let's say, these molecules are all shaped this way, and they all have this polar property. So that means that anywhere that we have a hydrogen on one water molecule, where we have this partial positive charge, that's available, and it'll be a favorable interaction to be close to an oxygen, which has this partial negative charge on an adjacent water molecule. So this sets up a hydrogen bonding network. And so you can imagine that we have lots of water molecules in a liquid. These are all going to be interacting in this way, right? And when we have other forms of water, for example, ice, what we find is that in ice, the water molecules are even more highly arranged, right? They're arranged in a very specific kind of lattice. It's sort of called a crystalline lattice, because if you look at the structure, all of the water molecules are arrayed in a very symmetrical way. And so if you, have let's say you have a, trying to think of a good example of this. You know, you have a can of soda or something that you want to chill quickly, and you put it in the freezer, and then you forget about it, and you go back later, and usually what has happened? Yes, somebody said it's exploded, right? And that's because as water freezes, it actually expands. And the reason it expands is that the molecules in the ice take up more space because they're organized in this highly sort of crystalline network. They take up a lot more space than they do when they're in a liquid where they are interacting more like this. They're packing more closely together. Now I was going to show you a little video here. Let's see if I can get this to work. And this has sound to it. So and I have this plugged in. So can we have the sound turned on? Hopefully this will work. Okay, so understandably, there's been a huge amount of research that's gone into understanding the structure of water and how water molecules interact, of course, with other kinds of molecules like biological molecules that we'll be talking about. And so I'll try to remind you in later lectures, but please do keep in mind that everything that we're going to discuss with these larger biomolecules is really, we have to think about the fact that they are all in the context of water, and they are all interacting with water molecules all the time. So there are really 4 properties of water that are probably the most important in terms of contributing to the fitness of our Earth for supporting life. And these are the properties listed here, and your book talks a lot more about these. But first one is cohesive behavior. So that means that, as we just discussed, water molecules like to be together, right? They like to interact with each other. They form these hydrogen bonding networks. And it turns out they not only form those hydrogen bonding networks with each other, but they also form hydrogen bonding interactions with other kinds of molecules. And that can really influence the chemical behavior of those other molecules. And we'll see this when we start talking about, in particular, nucleic acid structures and protein structures, like we're going to discuss on Friday, where these water molecules, because they have this ability to hydrogen bond, they greatly influence the way that biological molecules fold up and the way that they turn out to function. Okay, so that's one thing, cohesive behavior. The second thing is that water is really good at moderating temperature. And here in the Bay Area, you know this based on our proximity to the Bay and to the Pacific Ocean, right? You know that if we're really close to if we're down at the Bay or we're on the, right on the ocean, the temperature and the weather there is often very different than what it is just even a mile or 2 inland, right? And why is that? Well, the water has a very large effect on the climate, and it has a very large effect on the resulting temperature. And so that's a sort of a very large-scale example of this, but this goes on all the time inside of cells as well. And so our cells and our bodies are able to regulate temperature in part because we're composed of so much water. We have a lot of water around. It's very easy for water molecules to absorb heat and also to distribute heat so that temperature stays relatively constant. Okay, so that's the second property of water. Third one is expansion upon freezing. So we just talked about that a little bit. And so this is, again, a property that is really important for biology and for biological samples, because it means that, because the structure of water changes so much on going from a liquid to a solid, it really influences the way that biological that way that organisms can interact in their environment, okay, and something that all organisms have to deal with. They have to deal with this change and protect themselves against freezing that occurs when water gets cooled. And then ultimately, water is a very versatile solvent, so it can be used to dissolve various different kinds of both large biological molecules, but also very small molecules, and make them available to organisms to absorb, and that's a critical element, for example, in human nutrition, right? We absorb nutrients and small molecules in part because they are dissolved in water inside of our bodies. Okay, and so, and then I want to just bring up these 2 terms right here, cohesion and adhesion. So these are terms that really have to do, again, with the behavior of water, and I just want to make sure that you're familiar with these. So this phenomenon of cohesion is really this idea that hydrogen bonds hold water molecules together, right? And they also, and like I said, they not only hold water molecules together, but they also hold other kinds of molecules together. And when we start looking at the structure of enzymes and proteins that form enzymes and other kinds of important biological molecules, we'll see that water is really important in the formation of those kinds of molecular structures. Okay, and that's because of this property of cohesion. Cohesion helps the transport of water against gravity in plants. So you might wonder, how is a redwood able to pull nutrients all the way from the ground to maybe 80 or 100 feet in the air? And that's in part because of the way that water, the cohesion of water and the interaction of water molecules are able to push nutrients up. And of course, there's lots of other things going on as well, but it's the fundamental chemistry of water that plays an intricate part in that process. Okay, and then cohesion, together with cohesion, there's another term I want you to know, which is adhesion. So this is an attraction between different substances, right? And so this is, we see adhesion in those interacting water molecules that we looked at, but of course, there's also adhesion that goes on between water molecules and all the other molecules that are found in life as well. So again, it's a property that is very important for life because it allows molecular interactions to occur that if we were trying to have a world made out of, I don't know, ethanol or something wouldn't be as efficient. Okay, so water just turns out to be a very, very convenient solvent for all of these kinds of reasons. Okay, and then this is really just my last slide for today. I just want you to be familiar with the following units of both temperature and energy. Okay, so in most of the US, we often use the British system, but I want you to, when we're talking about various concepts that we'll be discussing in this course, we'll often refer to temperature on the Celsius scale. So you need to be familiar with the Celsius scale for measuring temperature. Okay, this is the symbol for that. We're also going to talk about energy in terms of calories. So a calorie is the amount of heat that's required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. And you should note that, some of you might know this, but the calories that are listed on food packages, these are actually kilocalories, right? Where 1 kilocalorie is just 1,000 calories. So that gives you a sense of the scale that we're actually talking about. So a calorie is a pretty small amount of energy, right? And then finally, we're also going to sometimes refer to joules, and this is another unit of energy that's very commonly used, where 1 joule is equal to a fraction of a calorie, 0.239 calories, or we also need to know this conversion. 1 calorie is 4.184 joules. Okay, so just make sure that you're familiar with those terms for temperature and energy. Have a good day, and I'll see you guys on Friday.